Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So excited that you are all here and able to join us for this amazing conversation this afternoon. I'm going to give it a few more minutes just to allow folks to get logged in and settled. Hope that you all have had some nice hot coffee or tea, staying warm wherever you are. Welcome to folks who are just coming in. Good afternoon. Really excited that you're here, able to join us. We're going to get started in just about 30 seconds or so. Just want to give folks a few more moments to log in. All right, I think we're ready to hop in. Good afternoon. Welcome to Diversity by Design, which is a webinar series that supports district leaders in advancing educator diversity initiatives through policy and practice. Today's webinar is hosted by TNTP and the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign, and we are extremely grateful that each of you made the choice to be here today for this conversation that we hope continues to help you serve your students, educators, and community members more equitably. As we go through today's content, please feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat. And this session is being recorded and will be provided to you following the rest of the webinar. If this is your first time joining us, welcome again. My name is Stephanie Tomlinson, and I'm a director here at TNTP. I come to this work as a fellow educator, serving in roles as a teacher, a school leader, and state policy representative. And I am so delighted to facilitate today's discussion alongside my colleague, Christine Love. We are so excited for you as well to hear more from our special guests, Modesto and Jeffrey, who both serve as district leaders in the field. Today's webinar is the last of a series of sessions that are uniquely designed to explore and advance educator diversity by helping to bridge that gap between theory and practice. So in today's session, we're going to explore the essentials for long-term impact in educator diversity and think more concretely about the sustainability of the work. We hope that today's conversation and this webinar series continues to reinforce that in order for us to accomplish our vision for the student experience, we must invest in and attend to the educator experience, particularly our teachers of color. In our last session, we explored 4 key concepts that help you mobilize toward a diverse educator workforce. We talked about creating a vision for the student and educator experience, engaging a diverse set of stakeholders in the planning and implementation process, that your retention strategy is your recruitment strategy, and also finding ways to address both the technical and adaptive challenges. We will continue to reinforce and build upon these messages in today's discussion as well. So today we're going to spend our time building on these important key messages through a district panel that will provide you with some examples and stories and guiding principles for sustaining educator diversity in your unique context. We'll also provide you with some key learnings and evidence-based recommendations that can support you in your efforts. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available to you following the webinar. I also encourage you to pull out a notebook, pen, anything that will be helpful for you in capturing today's learnings to have with you as you continue this very important work. This webinar series comes together as a collaboration between TNTP and the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign, which is a national campaign which TNTP is honored to be a part of. The campaign has the bold goal of increasing teachers of color by 1 million and school leaders of color by 30,000 by the year 2030. When the campaign was initially launched in 2021, this was the calculation of what it would take to close that educator to student diversity gap. This campaign is also led by a steering committee of 8 national and impactful organizations, which you see listed here on the slide. And these organizations came together recognizing that in order to truly drive educator diversity nationwide, a national call was necessary in order to rally national support around educator diversity and what can be done in advance nationwide. I also just want to make a particularly special shout out to new leaders who was a part of this steering committee, as they were very important and vital in contributing to today's conversation. And you'll have opportunity to hear from Jeffrey, who's a part of new leaders. And we're so incredibly grateful for the work that they're doing and the voices that they're bringing into this space today. We also want to acknowledge the work that we have done with the Driving Toward Diversity cohort. TNTP partnered with the Bar Foundation to support 14 LEAs to analyze local and talent landscape, actively listen to community voices, and understand the current student and educator experience. So our learnings today are a reflection of that work and our results. We remain grateful to all of our participating cohort members for their engagement and commitment to educator diversity. With that, it is my pleasure to kick off our district panels with leaders from Libertas Academy Charter School and Promise Academy Hollywood. Welcome, Modesto and Jeffrey. We're so excited to have you here. Today's panel explores 4 guiding principles to support district leaders in sustaining educator diversity. The first principle, we create alignment between our talent strategy and all other aspects that influence the educator and student experience. We foster partnerships within our community that extend beyond the school building. We effectively implement change management strategies to support buy-in and sustainability. And finally, we use a continuous improvement model to monitor progress and adjust our practices in real time. I'm going to pause really quickly for a quick poll for the audience. As you look at these guiding principles, which one is top of mind for you? Which principle are you thinking about the most at your current stage of educator diversity efforts? I'm seeing some of those answers come in. Thank you all. We have just over 60% of participants submit their answers. Very fascinating of where you all are in this journey and what you're thinking most about. We'll spend like 10 more seconds for you all to look at these principles and indicate which ones you're thinking about the most today for today's conversation. All right. So you should see those results. We do have folks thinking about each one of these principles, but it looks like a lot of folks are really thinking about how they're creating alignment between their talent strategy and all of the aspects that influence the educator and student experience, which is such a great place for you all to be thinking about. And I know that Modesto and Jeffrey will speak to some of this and how it looks in their context as well. So with that, I am going to transition us into the panel. It is my pleasure to welcome Modesto Montero, who's the founder and executive director of Libertas Academy, and Jeffrey Monroe, who is the principal at Promise Academy Hollywood. Thank you both so much for being here to speak more about your experiences in this important work. And to start, I would love for each of you to provide a brief introduction and share more about your background and expertise in education, specifically of how your work thus far has centered educators and students of color. And Modesto, we'll start with you, and I will stop sharing so that we can all get a little comfy and see each other a little bit better.
Sounds good. Good or morning or afternoon, depending on where you're located. Uh, Jeffrey, I'm actually in California, so we're both on the West Coast, but I live in Springfield, Massachusetts. I started as a Teach for America core member back in 2011. And really what brought me to education was my personal upbringing. I was born in Dominican Republic, migrated to the States in middle school. I was lucky that my parents moved to a predominantly white middle class community. And I say lucky because we know what comes with that, particularly in the K-12 sector. And I went to a great middle school, high school, and that's not the experience for kids that look like me, that have a similar starting point. And that's what brought me to education, has kept me here. First as a classroom teacher, then a teacher coach, then eventually had an opportunity to launch a 6-12 charter school in Springfield, Massachusetts, where we predominantly serve Black and Brown students, mostly Latinos of Puerto Rican and Dominican descent. So it feels like home every single day going to work. So when I think about how I center our students, I think about my personal experience. I think about my family and the type of school that we are, that I'm leading every single day. I think about the possibility that exists in transforming the lives of our students, the way education transformed my life. That's what we do every single day. And in order for that to be true, it is so important that kids see themselves reflected in the leaders and the teachers that are in the building.
Thank you, Modesto. We're so honored to have you here. And Jeffrey, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Monroe. I am the principal at Promise Academy Hollywood in Memphis, Tennessee. I came into education around 2009 as a chemistry teacher. Was really fortunate to be at a school that prioritized mentorship and onboarding. And because of that, I was able to accelerate my instructional practices immediately and become an effective teacher as a first-year teacher, almost as though I was a third-year teacher because of that mentorship. I had an opportunity to become a teacher leader, a coach, eventually got an opportunity to go to the district level at the local district here, oversee some programming around extended learning and student support, which gave me an opportunity to see the importance of that. And then later on, got a chance to develop my instructional leadership practices with new leaders, and was then hired here at Promise Academy Hollywood in North Memphis as a first-year principal. So there's a steep learning curve that's happening as a result of that. But what I do every single day is ensure that we're creating conditions and putting equity first at everything we do. And that's how we ensure that the students that we serve are seen, heard, and affirmed every single day. And they're getting an educational experience that's second to none, regardless of where they come from.
Ooh, we haven't even talked about anything yet, and I already have all the feels, all the chills. It's so much power in hearing you both introduce yourself and how you've been orienting into this work in education, but also specifically on behalf of the community that you serve. So this first question I'd like to ask you, Modesto, when you think about the work that's been happening at Libertas, and what you've been focused on when it comes to educator diversity, what has those efforts looked like for your students, your educators, your community members? How have you sort of set that vision, those priorities, and sort of set a path forward in getting folks kind of corralled around the work that's happening at Libertas?
Yeah. I would say that it honestly has been embedded in the story of our organization in terms of like from day one when we launched. I think starting a school from the ground up as a leader of color, to me, having a diverse staff was not a nice to have, it was a must have. Just like for my own survival as a leader, right? Like I knew that I needed to find like-minded people and people that share aspects of my identity. And I happen to share the identity of my students. So honestly, it came organically from that place first, because it is there's so many things that come to play when you're supporting, coaching, and managing people across lines of difference. That was something I was really sensitive to, right? Building the school from the ground up. And it became who we were. Like we were a diverse leadership, which meant we like then had diverse staff. Now we're in a stage of not, it's not just about ensuring that we maintain those high level of a diverse team, but then how do we continue to attract them? How do we develop them? How do we compensate them appropriately and then retain them? I think too often we stop short of that. We're like, we're just gonna open the door and like give them a seat at the table, and that's it. And we're gonna walk away. But no, but it's like continuous engagement in that. And that looked like embarking on a 5-year strategic plan that engage the entire community. So students, families, our board, community partners, and our staff to identify what are the things that we're doing well. What do we need to continue to do better for the growth of this organization? And like the teacher development came to the forefront of like you do a really good job of bringing us here and you're like developing us, but like I am not clear what excellence looks like at Libertas codified, and then therefore I'm not sure where I stand against the bar of excellence. And if I want to make this a career, and that goes beyond the diversity sort of conversation, right? Like if I want to make this a long-term career here at Libertas, I want to make sure we're doing that work. And we went through like a robust process of redesigning our evaluation process, redesigning our compensation, and doing an equity study to ensure there weren't sort of discrepancies in pay. And like once we sort of clear all of those milestones, now we're in a place of like implementing the strategic plan that we put in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I definitely am going to come back and ask more about like how you got so many folks across those lines of difference sort of bought in to that. But I do want to pivot over to you, Jeffrey, especially as like a first year principal in your context and thinking about just the amount of change management and people work that requires to get folks sort of like first defining what the vision is around the student and educator experience in that space and what you want it to look like. And then, how are you kind of creating the infrastructure so that people are implementing those things with fidelity? So I'd love to hear more from you about like what your experience has been as a first year principal of setting up the vision for serving your students and educators of color, and how you have worked to sort of bring the spine of the school and then those priorities together in a really cohesive way for your community.
Sure. So that's the work, right? That's the adaptive work that you have to do every single day. Primarily, you have to model the vision and what you see. You have to communicate it, and then you have to constantly shift mindsets. And that's just an ongoing thing, whether it's through formal meetings, whether it's through just informal conversations in the hallway, whether it's doing things that typically principals aren't seen as doing, anything, sweeping in the cafeteria, picking up trash, setting up cone. I mean, just all the things that show people that you're not just talking, you're showing them exactly what your expectations are, you're modeling them, and then you're helping them to narrow their focus and focus on the things that they can control.
Mm-hmm.
Because in change management, there's so many moving parts and shifts that are taking place. People can often become overwhelmed with all of the shifting. My job is to create the conditions for not just teachers, but students and families to focus on what's important and stay focused on that. And you do that by just having very, very honest conversations, asking people their thoughts, um, and when you can, implementing the things that they ask you to do with an equity lens at the entire time.
Modesto, would you like to add anything to that in terms of what that's looked at Libertas?
I co-sign a lot of what Jeffrey shared. I think for us, systematizing how we engage our staff has helped us, and that has been embedded in our work from year one. That looks like ongoing, particularly the start of the school year, ongoing surveys in the first like couple of weeks, like every single week, and then shifting to like the quarterly model, and then having two major surveys in the middle of the year and end of the year, and being really visible in how we're responding to that feedback has helped uh, invest the team that like we value them. We care about their perspective, we care about their opinion, and while we're not perfect, we strive to continue to shift and adjust and respond to the feedback that we're hearing, both from staff and from our students and families.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think this is also a good transition when we think about how we define community and the way that I think that that's transforming for us now that we are sort of thinking bigger and bolder and sort of trying to get away from these very traditional ways of doing education. I mean, it used to be that, you know, we are only concerned about the folks in our school building, like who are the students and who are the teachers like right in front of us. But we know that a student's experience and even an adult's experience is influenced by so much more than that. And so I'm curious about how both of you have been able to foster partnerships beyond the school building to help move those goals towards help move towards your internal goals, right? Like when I think about those, I think about local community organizations. I think about your local universities. I think about, again, parents and families that are interested in being involved. So how have you been able to sort of engage and leverage sort of the community expertise to help you move forward this work in a sustainable way?
Jeffrey, you want to go first? You want me to? Me? Sure. I say this a lot to my team and to students that ultimately I want as many opportunities as possible for our kids, right? So I'm constantly hunting and connecting with folks and bringing as much back to Libertas as possible. And I see that as like one of my most critically important roles that I can play as like the connector for Libertas, right? We're a 6-12 college prep school. And so college is our mission. It's not necessarily the end goal for our kids. And we want to be able to inspire them and light a fire. And we know that it takes a village. All things that we all know. So we are really strategic in expanding those opportunities. Everything from like on the teacher pipeline side, thinking through, right? If we want to have a diverse staff, we have to have a diverse pool of candidates. So we can't just do the thing that every other organization does. We have to do more than that. And we have to think about like what are the barriers that keep young people of color from entering the profession. And like that is like a whole thesis that we could probably talk about for days, but like we knew that was a barrier. And we had to connect with folks like Teach for America, Teach Western Mass, some of the local colleges and universities, working with the community centers who had volunteers or folks that were working part-time. Like, you're great with kids. I get it. You're in the middle of your degree. You don't know what you want to do. Like, come work for us part-time and get you hooked on that component. And then on the student side, thinking through like what are all of the opportunities that exist both in the Springfield community and the surrounding communities that we can partner with and bring to Libertas. Like we found this really cool community organizer that has grown a drumline program. We brought it to Libertas and it's now one of like the signature program. We're in the process of expanding our rowing club, which you often don't see Black and brown kids rowing, but we know that that is like a real way to get into some like top colleges and universities. So we're like getting creative, like what are the things that we can do to both inspire our students, but like set them up to succeed once they leave Libertas. And there's so many different examples, but those are like the big ones that come to mind. But I'm hungry for it. Any opportunity to connect with a community leader, to connect to the program and bring it back to Libertas, like I'm all about it.
Of that.
So I love this question because as someone who's been in the seat for a few months, the first thing that I essentially did was kind of learn the history of the community. And then I did some like high level asset mapping to determine uh, places close to the school, businesses, community partners, just in churches, anyone who would benefit from having Promise Academy become a point of light in a neighborhood that has been forgotten for years. And after that, it's funny, my teachers look at me strangely because as the principal, I have the authority to make unilateral decisions, but I never do, right? I make decisions that are community centered and not school centered. Like, I want everyone at the table. I want teachers to help make decisions. I want parents. We have a parent advisory council. We just had a meeting uh, last week to identify like what we could do to get out into the community and just not support the school, but families who live close to the school. And I also recently had this past week some people fly in from San Francisco, Atlanta, Philadelphia, people who have done this work to kind of give me an idea of what we can do now and what we can do in the long term to do things that are going to support the community and support the students that we serve. For example, one thing that we're looking at is creating a farmer's market out of the back of the school, doing some food pantry work, and just creating a place where families can come, a parent, parent resource center, even a place where parents can come wash clothes when they need to. So just anything that I can do to involve the community and make this a place where people want to come. And when they come, we can meet their needs, whatever they may be.
I love that. You both are doing so many amazing things in your community. Like if I was going back into teaching, I survived ninth grade English, and I don't know if I don't know if I could go back. But if I did go back, I'll be going back to one of your schools, because I can just tell the type of culture that you're creating there is so important for your students and educators. And I think that also just sort of leads into sort of the other coin of this conversation. It's like when you have to shift or pivot when things aren't working. And so I'm curious, from both of your perspectives and how things have looked in your community, like how and where have you had to refine or shift your approach to all things connected to educator diversity, whether that's the anti-bias hiring training or doing some like culturally responsive anti-racist work with your staff members, or that one teacher that is just not having the changes. Like, I'm curious about what types of barriers you all have ran into, and then how you've adjusted or refined based on what came up to help keep that momentum and sustainability in the work, because sometimes that's what stops us and helps us lose steam. And so I'm curious about how you kind of push forward through those barriers or address those. And Modesta, we could start with you.
Sure. So I named that we engage our community frequently through surveys, and there are other different touch points, but I think at the core of it, we are a very data-driven organization, and we use that data to make decisions. And we've been fortunate to have started from one grade in sixth grade, and we're growing. Next year, we'll have our first cohort of seniors. So it's part of the way we do business at Libertas. Like, we're constantly refining, reflecting, and adjusting based on like the concrete data, not just our feelings. I think that's the hardest part, right? I think sometimes we have like emotional reactions to what's happening, and we climb a lot of inference way too quickly and jump to an action step. And part of my job is to show restraint and to expect that from my leaders, of like, we have to be able to take a step back, look at all the data pieces, think, what is the story the data is telling us? What is our plan of attack, and how we will know if it's working or not? Because if we continue to adjust every time something feels off, then we're not gonna make the appropriate traction. And that's hard, but now it is how we operate. People just know, like, okay, like survey season's coming around, like this is my opportunity to provide that feedback and then be responsive to it. And it's worked for us, where every year feels stronger than the year before. And it's something that we want to continue to do. I think the specific piece though that like the data wasn't helpful with is the adaptive like challenges that arise from it, right? Like you can have all the data in the world, you can have the plan, but when rubber meets the road and you're working with people, then it's something else. And that something else has been the piece that we've had to troubleshoot, and realizing like we have to expand the capacity of our leaders and expand their skill sets. Because if we have a plan of attack, if we don't have the right people who can then execute it, it doesn't matter. Like we might as well not even collect data. So that's a piece that we've been like really drilling down on, and then specifically working along lines of difference has been like the stickiest part of the adaptive work. When we move beyond the binary race conversation, the black and white, which it feels like as a Latino man, it feels like we're often stuck in that place. And I understand the history of the why, right? And I understand why it's so important that we do that. But there are other identity markers that start to sort of like create real tension in the work. And like we're at a stage of like, oh, like we don't have the skill sets to like navigate these other pieces, because for so long we've only focused on this and we're further along in our journey. There aren't as many resources. Like what do we need to do differently? And we're experiencing that. And I mean that specifically for our non-binary staff, our staff of color who are also queer, or like a part of like the different who have other identity markers that just like manifest in different ways. That's been a really important challenge for us to tackle head on, and we're still like in it. We're still in like the midst of like how do we like get better at ensuring that like, those concerns are brought to the surface, and how do we ensure that as a team we're responding to it appropriately in ways that strengthen our community and not necessarily derail the work that we're doing.
Mhm.
So I'll add on to all of that. That was, I mean, what Modesto said is exactly aligned with kind of the challenges that we're facing as well. What I'll add is specifically a challenge that we've had to address post-COVID is the social and emotional wellness of not just our students, but our staff. Like trying to focus on how people are coping, how they're feeling, creating conditions for them to actually feel valued and want to come to work. That's like been the primary focus and where I root a lot of my work in situational leadership. Other than like the binary race conversation, one challenge that I'm finding is that there's a lot of diversity in changes in generations, right? So the way you coach a baby boomer is not the same way you coach a millennial, is not the same way you coach a Gen Z. And you have to be super adaptive in that. And you have to create very specific relationships with individuals in order to coach them effectively and improve their instructional practices and make them want to come to work. I've had to do some managing up with that because some of my direct supervisors are transitioning out of education. So the way that they see the work is really traditional. And I've had to have some really honest conversations about how you address some of the Generation Z teachers. It's not going to be as effective as what you probably did specifically before COVID. So that has been like the greatest challenge, trying to make sure people are well enough, like emotionally, to come to work. That's a huge piece.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you both just didn't underscore enough just how much of this work being sustainable is people work. And while we're changing systems or transforming systems, like we have to be thinking about the people that are a part of those systems and like how we are setting them up for success to be in the work with us. And so I appreciate you both for just elevating that really important and crucial point. That's not only for today's conversation, but I think a trajectory of how we set up this entire series around. You have to think about the people that are in front of you and the people in your community to really ensure that they're having an experience that makes them feel seen, valued, and affirmed. I do want to ask one last question, but also like encourage audience members. We're going to go to a Q&A in about 3 to 4 minutes. So I'd love for you to think about questions that are on your mind and things you'd like to ask Jeffrey and Modesto. So please go ahead and start putting those in the chat as we head to the Q&A portion. But the last question I want to ask each of you within this panel is, what is one thing that you would recommend that other leaders explore or consider when it comes to sustaining their work for educator diversity that you feel hasn't been brought up yet? And I would say, even more specifically, thinking about what we know folks are thinking about in this space today is like, how are we bringing all of this together to make sense? When we talk about creating a very like transformative experience for our educators and students of color, that does not exist over here in a silo. This isn't separate work that we're doing. This all has to come together to create like a really holistic experience. And so if either of you have any like final thoughts or recommendations or things that you think that this audience could think about or put into practice, I'd love to end our panel discussion with those thoughts. And Jeffrey, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. So I'm sitting here because people were super intentional about my onboarding process and creating kind of wraparound services and mentorship. That is crucial. Like, we have to be super intentional and focused on not just hiring, but continuous development, mentorship, and that should be a system and structure that's not just months long, but years long. Specifically, like I said, after COVID, education is different. It's transformed completely, and the people who are coming into the work have been transformed as well. And the way that we've been doing school is not going to work moving forward. So we have to be very, very intentional about identifying talent, and then creating systems and structures around developing that talent, and then creating mentorship that just goes beyond a few weeks or a few months, but goes into years.
I love that. I co-sign wholeheartedly, Jeffrey. The piece particularly around ensuring that we're thinking about development, not just the first 30 days or 90 days, but ongoing. I think that the other word of caution, if I may, that I would throw out there is to resist the urge to make this work a simplified goal, meaning like you're going to set a threshold of like 30% of our people, of our staff will be people of color, or 50%, whatever the arbitrary number is. I think there's real danger in that, right? I think you then are focusing on just like an end goal and not necessarily thinking about the importance of diversity and being as diverse as possible, and pushing to define what diversity means in your community and the value that it brings. I think that's the first word of caution. I think the second piece that I would name is that, and I've seen this in some of the schools that I'm connected to that were primarily led by staff, white staff, right, at the highest level. The focus is on let's bring on teachers of color, but then you have this dual power dynamic with the majority of the leaders are white. You have a large section of your staff that's people of color, and then the culture naturally probably feels more white dominant, and you're like now creating a condition where staff of color can't be successful. So it's not just about increasing the numbers, but it's also challenging like our own culture, like within the systems that we lead, and think through like, is this culture, the way that we do the work, going to be will they be able to succeed in this environment? And if that is not the case, what are the conditions that have to be true for that to happen? And even though like we have a diverse leadership and diverse staff, we're constantly asking that question of ourselves. We're like right, because diversity continues to like evolve and shift a little bit. But those would be like my two pieces of advice as folks are thinking through how to amplify the diversity work within their communities.
Thank you both so much. You dropped so many gems today. I told people to get their notebooks and pens out. I hope they listened and they got what you were throwing. We have one question from one participant thus far, and I am encouraging folks to still drop questions in the chat if you have them. It says, I'm curious what tools or resources you use to stay organized with planning thoughtfully for this work, since it is forever ongoing. What has worked best for your team?
I can go first. I would say I just love systems and structures. So we have a flow in how we engage in this work as a senior leadership team, where we have what I call a senior leadership team hub, and it's a spreadsheet that sort of like a one-stop shop for all of those pieces, including our strategic plan, and meeting on a biweekly basis to discuss big topics. And this is one of them, right? And like we continue to move the work forward because it's easy for each of us to sort of operate in silo or just focus on like the workflow that most aligns with our work. And we're like really intentional about creating spaces where we're thinking about the totality of the organization and then creating action plans around what matters most. I think that's the first piece. I think the second, if possible, and it's also helpful to bring outside support. So we work with TNCP on a lot of this work. Like we had some of the systems and we had so many of the resources like, hey, like here's all of our data, like here's what we're doing. We need another set of eyes to just help us organize and say like, are we on the right track? Are we off? Are we missing the mark? Because like we can set a bar, but if we are just assessing internally if that bar of excellence is at the right level, then I think we're likely to miss or have some real blind spots. So those are the two things, right? Like creating strong systems to organize and create space for this work to happen cyclically, and if possible, think outside of your organization and bring someone else who can hold up the mirror and like really push excellence.
Yeah, and I totally agree with all of that. I would only add that in order to move this school forward, the first thing that I had to do was stop and kind of diagnose the gaps, and using some type of protocol or rubric to do that is really helpful. And it ensures that you have an equity lens and you're not making, like Modesto said, you're not making arbitrary decisions. And then to close out the year, my intention is to bring all of our community partners together, our parent advisory council, our teacher leaders, and then complete an equity audit to ensure that we're putting equity at the center of the work, and that all people, all stakeholders have a voice and are helping us make decisions that are, again, community centered and not school centered.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing I'll do, Jeffrey, is I'll reach out after this call to see if you have links to some of those protocols and audits that you use, and I'll be sure to include those in the resource list for our participants. That sounds awesome. We have one more question. What systems do you have in place to incentivize teachers to be mentors? And what sort of training do they receive to be the best possible mentors to novice teachers? It's a really good one.
So I can start. That's actually, I'm in the process of building that, right? So I haven't had the opportunity to create that system yet, but what I am doing is in the process of identifying teacher leaders and having kind of informal conversations and putting kind of the bug in their ear about leadership opportunities, and edging them towards that. And any opportunities that I can find within the school or outside of school to allow them to flex kind of their leadership muscle, I encourage it, and I do everything I can to ensure that that's happening. Around mentorship, again, identifying teachers who are not just effective as teachers, but also have the mindset and the temperament to do that kind of work. Like coaching for equity is super relational, and it requires a lot of grace and an extreme amount of intellectual humility. And you have to be vulnerable enough to say those things and say simple things like, I don't know. So creating space for those folks and identifying them, that's a huge part of what I'm doing at the moment.
For us, we have both formal and informal structures that I believe really help our teachers grow and develop. I'll focus mostly on the formal ones, and I can quickly talk about some of the informal structures. And that starts from the moment we recruit you and hire you. We have teacher ambassadors who are folks within the organization, and we intentionally pick ambassadors who are in their first or second year within Libertas because I think they have the best context of like, here's what you're gonna experience. It's gonna be like drinking out of a fire hydrant. Here's like the things that I had to learn. And so I want you to like learn essentially from my mistakes as part of like the initial getting ready for your first day on staff. Outside of that, we are really intentional in terms of like our coaches load so that they don't have a huge coaching load, usually 6 to 8 teachers, really, ideally six, so that deans can really go deep, particularly with newer teachers, and they can be in their classrooms often, not just to like coach from behind the playing field, but really being able to co-teach if they need to, like model in real time and have a lot of coaching cycles to close those gaps really quickly. So that helps. Then we have a grade level chair structure that extends beyond what a typical grade level chair. You're not just facilitating spaces, but you really are like the holder of culture for that grade. So part of your job is to be able to be in those spaces and support teachers, get them set up to be successful in our system so that they can succeed, right? So those are all of the different ways. And if you are a teacher leader in any of those roles, you get training both in the summer and throughout the year to ensure you're like developing your skills. And we have a couple of other teacher leadership responsibilities. Like we have a DEI fellow, right, who like they help co-design a lot of our DEI sessions so that we're getting the teacher perspective and input as part of it. And then informally, honestly, like each grade becomes sort of like their own mini family. And when we have like retention conversations, we're thinking of like the relationship web of like who is connected to whom, like who is struggling, and how do we like leverage the existing relationship to go beyond coaching. Because especially if you're newer to the profession and you're a person of color and you come from a low income household, very much like I did, they're just like other barriers that are real. Like many of us, and I experienced this when I entered the classroom, weren't, I was also supporting my extended family in lots of different ways, right? So there was like all this tension. And if something came up, I had to like leave school to deal with because my cousin needed something or my niece and nephew. And that is not necessarily like what a typical what we expect or what we allow to be true. So like we think beyond like the normative approach to professionalism and create spaces where we can have those honest conversations and support our team proactively.
Mm-hmm. Oh, time flies when we're having fun. We have one last question because I know that we are running up on our time here for the panel. This one says, my school is in the process of creating a DEI council. Do you have something like this at your organization? If so, how is it structured and what are they responsible for?
I can go first. So we don't call it a council, but we do have a DEI team, and it is a combination of senior leaders, mid-level leaders, and teachers. And part of that work is creating the vision for the experiences within our school, both like the sessions and how we can embed DEI not just in like a 90-minute PD session once a quarter, but like how does that live day in and day out? And we wrapped up, as I mentioned, a strategic plan, which led to us redesigning our core values. And it came out of those conversations like they're not who we are anymore. So, right. And like we explicitly named like inclusive community as part of it. As like that is something that we value. It's not an add-on, it is who we are. And like are really intentional still of like how does that live and breathe every day. And it's hard work and it's like always a bit of a moving target. So that helps. I think that the piece that's missing in this work for us right now is like how do we incorporate our students and our families better into this system, because it feels like right now it's just the adults making all these decisions, and we have high schoolers and even middle schoolers, like they can be a part of that process, and so like we are navigating that now and thinking through like, do we just create more space for this DI team to include students and families, or do we like create a different space because there's like different challenges? So we're TBD on what that would look like, but that is like the next phase of the work. And as you're creating this, I encourage you to not take on too much. Great can sometimes be the enemy of the good, and we try to create this like robust, beautiful plan. We end up doing nothing. So I much prefer like getting clear on like what are the 2 to 3 things that you want to get right this year and building on that.
I'm going to break the rules real quick. Jeffrey, as we wrap up this conversation, I want you to answer this question. I'm such a sucker for making sure questions get answered, and this one's really, really good. So I'm going to have you answer the last and final question, I promise. How important do you think it is for principals? How important do you think it is for principals and school leaders to have their own community of support? What do your supports look like currently, and how did you find or build them? I think this is particularly great for you, Jeffrey, considering where you are in your principalship right now.
Awesome question. That's really good. It's lonely at the top. Let me tell you that. But what you have to do is, so if you don't, everyone out there, if you don't have a mentor right now in your life, go get one. You have to have mentorship in this work. You have to have people who have walked in these shoes, because the challenge is most people in your building only know like 10% of the work that you're doing. The other 90% they'll never see. And someone has to help you kind of deal with the stress and cope with all of the decisions that you make. So as principals, we have to be super intentional about continuing our improvement and bringing mentorship into our lives every single day. So I call people when I have questions. I have at least 4 or 5 people in town that I can call when I have questions. I have a few people out of town. So being super, super intentional about prioritizing mentorship and not being scared to ask questions. And then as a principal, I found it super valuable when a leader was vulnerable enough to say they don't know. And I have a problem. I mean, I don't have a problem telling teachers if I don't have an answer. So showing vulnerability and mentorship are super important for principals.
Thank you both so much. What a pleasure to talk to you about this important work. And then you are just both amazing humans. Thank you for the work that you're doing in your communities on behalf of students and educators. We appreciate you for creating space today and sending you off with all of the good things in the world as you continue to do this very important work as well. So we're going to go ahead and transition, and you can say goodbye to the wonderful audience members that listen to you. And thank you again for your time. All right. So we are going to keep it pushing. Want to make sure that you take some time to pause and reflect and think about the guiding practices that you want to pull into your work. We also want to continue to remind you that our systems are delivering exactly what they're designed to do. We have to continue to keep the mindset and adaptive shifts in this work. And I think that that was also reinforced in our discussion for the panel. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my lovely colleague, Christine, who's going to rush through some really important recommendations for you all to consider as you continue to do long-term sustainability.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Wow, the panel was so valuable. I hope that you each are taking away some real gems. I deeply appreciate Modesto, Jeffrey, and Stephanie for sharing their personal experiences and reflections, and know that it has prompted me to really think about what you can learn from those leading efforts in the field and how we can build upon that. Modesto and Jeffrey shared so much about how their work has been years and years of focus, continuously building and refining, and ensuring decisions are made with data and community input. As you think about sustaining your educator diversity efforts, you need to strategically plan for what these changes will look like for students, educators, and the broader community you serve. How are you considering the adaptive changes in human experience that you want to be true in the long term? Talent diversification is one way, one lever to improve the experience of educators and students, but all of the other systems and structures that are operating in your district or school impact educators and students. You need to take a pause and say, how is the talent strategy aligned to my overall vision for the student and educator experience? And how can it accelerate my space's ability to meet our goals? One strategy to consider when creating this alignment is change management overall. You're all very familiar with change management structures and the multiple frameworks that are available. It focuses on the humans that your policies and practices impact. We heard over and over again from the panel how important it is to center humans in all of our decision making, and that this is human-centered work. Change can be scary, even minor change. And if we aren't intentional about how we manage change, then it prevents us from reaching our ultimate goal, which is to create affirming and inclusive experiences for kids and educators. This visual about change management is a reminder to consider all the different components that come into play to ensure success, and bringing your communities along in partnership to create sustainable demanded change. Some ways that you can proactively manage complex change is to ensure that you have the right plan in place ahead of time and consider these different components. A vision requires consensus and buy-in. Who are the people you need to invest? Modesto spoke about modeling that vision in real time. How are you creating opportunities for learning around key skills? How are you incentivizing the value of investing in those skills? And finally, how are the resources that are in place going to support your plan? What resources do you need? What gaps exist? What is the short and long-term plan for how you communicate, introduce, and monitor progress? And then finally, whose voices and experiences are you keeping at the center as you consider how effective your action plan is in action? As an example, here are some concrete guiding questions we use within the cohort to support integrating change management into a diversification strategy. We'll share these as follow-up so you can take a closer look. When you start to implement your plan, you also need to have a way to monitor progress. Modesto and Jeffrey both spoke about this. Are you meeting your goals, and how do you know? There are many ways to approach progress monitoring, but we have found both in the cohort we've worked closely with, but also in other partnerships, the continuous improvement model can be incredibly successful. Modesto spoke about codifying what it means to be successful at Libertas and the ways to measure that. So let's dive into what that can look like. Continuous improvement is an iterative reflection process to make adjustments in real time based on what you're seeing. This way of monitoring progress allows for higher impact because it happens in the context of what you're doing, the work itself, rather than after the work is done, rather than after everything has been completed. It helps you identify what works and then scale for greater impact. And it also ensures that you're monitoring the experience of those that you are most hoping to impact. This process also helps you to clearly articulate your vision and intentions, but it leaves room for change. Again, this is human work, and as a result, we know things are not always going to go as planned. We also know that we might not have the positive impact we're looking for, and there may be unintended consequences. So this cycle of develop, implement, test, and iterate helps you make real-time adjustments, just the way you might coach teachers or lead classroom instruction for your kids. In all our work, data-informed reflection is critical to better understand our progress and inform next steps. This is both quantitative and qualitative data, as we talked about quite a bit in the first session. These two examples illustrate that it doesn't need to be overly complicated, but consistency and clarity and direction are key. So you want to establish cycles of review, you want to identify the data you're going to review, and the questions you'll explore. And you'll want to leverage a consistent review and reflection protocol to ensure you leave space for the actual action planning. What are you going to shift and how are you going to shift it? We'll also share these as part of follow-up so you can look more closely. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Stephanie to wrap us up.
Thanks, Christine. In closing, We just want to remind you that as you think about everything you've heard today, consider these action steps. What are your long-term priorities for the student and educator experience? Who else from your teams and community should be involved in change management? And how will you implement continuous improvement? What will it look like for your unique context? We also just want to recap our entire experience. I can't believe that we're already here at the last session. But as we wrap up the Diversity by Design series, we want you to think about the key processes and core messages for building and sustaining a diverse educator workforce. Exploring your data, developing an equitable talent strategy, actively addressing and removing barriers, and thinking about that through the lens of not only the folks that you're serving, but how are you centering those communities through authentic stakeholder engagement? How are you confronting racism and bias and being warm demanders in creating culturally affirming spaces? And then how are you really reorienting your lens to this work and seeing that your retention strategy is your recruitment strategy? We'll also share this visual out for you as well as a nice sort of visual of everything that we shared in this series. We also want to remind you that each of you is an influencer of policy, and there's a role for everyone to play in supporting greater recruitment and retention for educators of color. If you have not already, we welcome you to join the 1 Million Teachers of Color campaign to remain actively involved in this conversation and gain access to the countless resources and support that already exist through this campaign at a federal, state, and district level. Please feel free to scan the QR code or follow the link that we'll drop in the chat to sign up for the campaign. And then finally, I just want to extend so much gratitude to each of you for engaging in this webinar series. Please take a moment to complete our feedback survey to share more about your experience from this session and also the other ones if you've attended our other 2 sessions. We also encourage you to stay in touch and reach out to any of today's facilitators for further support in your efforts. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season and a happy new year. Sending you all the best in the work that you're continuing to do for your communities. And we are here for you for whatever support you may need. Please get in contact with us. And with that, have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you for attending.